So now we're going to be moving on to the Java section of the paper, section B, and it's always a good idea to familiarize yourself with the context and structure of the question. So in this case, we're working with a community-based counseling service called Hope, which offers clients the ability to book a time slot to see their counselor. Each time slot is 1 hour long. So already we know that we're going to be working with time slots and counselors. And then we have the client's details are stored in a text file called clients.txt. The second piece of information they give us is a booking schedule needs to be created for 5 of the counselors on a particular day. The names of the counselors are listed in a text file called counselors.txt. All the clients need an appointment to be booked with their counselor and at a time later than or equal to their preferred time. So now we already know that we're going to be reading from 2 files, clients.txt and counselors.txt. And again, these should be saved on your desktop already. It's also just really critical to be mindful of the information here that they want you to make a note of. And this is the fact that appointments can be booked for clients with a counselor at a time later than or equal to their preferred time. And this is going to become very important moving forward. It says that the program requires the following base classes, and already we've identified the clients and the time slots. And here it's just a list of the instance variables of this class. The earliest time slot the client would wish to book, and this is for earliest hour. We're looking at the constraints of earliest hour. 8 is the earliest, while 16 is the latest. So here again, I'm just going through the question and highlighting information that I think is going to be important. Okay, and then note 24-hour notation is used with values from 0 to 23. Okay, so now again, the time slot class, they've given us a very comprehensive overview of the instance variables. A class must be created to represent each time slot with a counselor. Each time slot is 1 hour long. A time slot has the following information. And again here they've given you the format of the clients.txt file. And the reason why I didn't spend too long on reading the rest of that question is because this information is all summarized in the UML diagram here. So let's look at this question, the first question, question 2. And it says, use the class diagram below to create a new class called client. And again, here we can see that this follows the structure of many IT papers where each class is a new question. And in this case, question 2 pertains to the client class. So we know that we're going to be creating a client class. Just very briefly to go over the interpretation of UML diagrams. This is an access modifier, so it tells us whether the variable or method is private or public, and this is the variable type. So in this case, the minus sign represents a private variable, and in general, it's a good idea to make your instance variables private. So we've got the client name, the preferred counselor, and the earliest hour, and here we've got the variable types that they expect you to declare these variables as. So these are the instance variables. This section of the UML diagram represents the instance variables, and this section of the UML diagram represents the methods. Now very briefly here you can see that this method actually takes in some arguments, and they've told you what they want you to call the parameters here. And as well as the parameter type, they've specified that as well. So it's going to be accepting 2 strings and an integer, as we can see. And then we have some accessor methods here. We've got the get client name, the get preferred counselor, and the get earliest hour. And these are returning this. This over here represents the return type of these methods. And we've got 2 strings and an integer. And 2 string methods, again, the return type is always going to be a string. And as we can see here, as denoted by the plus sign, these are all public methods. So let's dive right in and start with question 2.1. So for question 2.1, we're creating a new class named client with client name, preferred counselor, and earliest hour fields as indicated above. Now this is very straightforward. We can see it's worth 4 marks. So let's jump straight to NetBeans and tackle this question. So firstly, what we need to do is we need to create a new project. So File, New Project, and I'm going to, the default Java is fine. I'm going to call this paper IEB November 2020. I'm going to call this project IEB November 2020. We've created the project. And within this project now, we can see we have a package, and this is where we're going to be creating all of our classes. So once I've selected the package, I'm going to create our first class, the client class. And here we select new file, Java, the default is fine. And we're going to call this client. Okay, finish. As you can see, they've created a skeleton class for us here already. We've created the class, and now all we need to do is to declare the instance variables. So very quickly, revisiting our UML diagram, it's a private string called client name. It is a private string called preferred counselor, and it is a private integer called earliest hour. Okay, great. So that's question 2.1, and now we're going to move on to question 2.2. So question 2.2 asks us to create a constructor method that accepts a string in CN as a parameter representing the client name field, a string in PCS as a parameter representing the preferred counselor field, and an integer in EH representing the earliest hour. So this is all here. This is essentially stating the same thing. They expect us to take in these parameters in the constructor. But here, there's a crucial second part of the question which we can't leave out if we want to get all of the marks. So it says use these parameters to assign values to the fields. That's standard. Note that for value in NEH of greater than 16, earliest hour should be set to 16. Now this is really, really important. And we definitely, so this is not a straightforward constructor. There's one more constraint that they expect us to enforce on this parameter. So let's jump back to NetBeans and code this question. Okay, so we've got public client. Again, we're following the convention of calling us constructors by the same name as their class. And here we're accepting the parameters 2 strings, one called NCN and another one called NPC, and finally we're accepting an integer called NEH. Okay, so now we're going to do assign these parameters to the instance variables of the class. And remember, you want to get these statement declarations in the right order. So client name is equal to NCN and not the other way around. Earliest hour is equal to NEH. Okay, brilliant. So this is the straightforward part of the question, but remember there was a second part here which we need to complete. So it says, note that for a value of NEH greater than 16, earliest hour should be set to 16. Okay, so we're going to use an if condition for this, right? Because how else are we going to determine whether the value of NEH is greater than 16? So if NEH is greater than 16, earliest hour should actually be set to 16. Because we don't, on a conceptual level, the reason why this is happening is because, remember, they said that the last time slot is actually at 4 o'clock. So if a client's preference is later than 16 or 4 p.m., because remember we're using a 23-hour clock notation, if a client's preference, if their earliest hour is later than 16, we actually can't accommodate that time, which is why we have to set it to 16. So that is just conceptual level why we're doing what we are. And here again, that's why it's important to read the context of the question. Because earlier they did specify that time slots run from 8 to 16 or 4 p.m. Okay. And then it says here there is no problem with numbers less than 8 since the earliest available slot is 8. Okay, so this is simply because if you have a number less than 8, it's going to assign a later one by default, so that's fine. And then question 2.3 says, create accessor or get methods for the client name, preferred counselor, and earliest hour fields. So if you're using NetBeans, like I am, there's actually a really handy shortcut for this. So the shortcut for these methods is actually just to say control space. And as you can see, NetBeans very helpfully gives us a list of accessor and mutator methods here. So the ones they wanted us to define for this question are the get client name and the preferred counselor and earliest hour. So let's go back, control space. And get preferred counselor. Okay, great. So this was just to save time, we've used the NetBeans shortcut. And always use shortcuts where you can so that you can leave a little bit more time for the longer questions. Okay, great. So that's question 2.3. Now for question 2.4. So code a toString method to return the fields of a client as a string in the following format. Now be really, really careful here. Pay attention to where in the string they have spaces. For example, here, you don't want to miss that. And where they have tabs. So let's go ahead and code this. Public string, toString, because it's a toString method, the return type is a string. And we're going to be returning this one long string here, return client name plus tab. And remember here, it's a backward slash for tab, not a forward slash. Preferred counselor. Preferred counselor. Another tab. And the word earliest and a space. And earliest hour. And this colon and the 2 zeros. Okay, perfect. So that's our toString method, very straightforward. We're just returning one long string here. And let's go back to the question. So that is question 2.